These are the high-level training objectives, wherein what is expected out of you is that you not only understand the Kubernetes concepts, but be able to run the application-related workloads, whether it's a pod or bundling up applications and creating various combinations using different designs that are available in the Kubernetes space, and scale the applications and across uh, cloud availability zones. So that is what is expected at the end of the 3 days. As part of the scalability, as part of the availability of the application across the zone, we'll be touching on the service aspects of the Kubernetes, and also we will use the AWS load balancer. And while we do all our experiments, learn things, we'll get into a lot of problems, and we'll try to troubleshoot those as we go on. At the same time, there are a few troubleshooting tips are also there that I will share you during the session and also at the end of the session as well. You can feel free to ask any questions while we run on the topics. No need to wait at the end. And if we keep this session more interactive, we'll expect more knowledge sharing. If it becomes monologue, then the amount of knowledge that I would be in a position to share will be slightly lesser than otherwise. So this is the overall agenda. Even though this is a high-level agenda, we will keep some topics here and there, and based on how the session goes, how much time that we take for a particular subject topic.
So Rajesh, the session will be interactive, right? So we'll be doing practice from our side, right?
Exactly. The aim of this session is to be as interactive as possible, so that while I explain the concept, you ask the questions, and we can get into more detail for that particular aspect wherever required.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the TOC for this chapter: architecture, components, different kind of components, master node, and any add-on. Also a few primitives of the Kubernetes object, and the kubectl utility to interact with the cluster. That we'll take a look. Okay, so this is the journey. One of you asked the questions on how we have come to containers. So this is the journey that we have had. Initially, when we started maybe 10, 15 years back, we had the traditional deployment, where the app components were deployed directly on the OS, and OS was running on some hardware. And the utilization and the interference issues, those started having a lot of complexity in managing the app in the production, and hence we moved to virtualized deployment, and that's where the VMware came in, virtually the VMware. One additional enhancement that we've got is we got the hypervisor, that is another layer on top of the base OS to create multiple OSs. So that's the virtual machine layer. And then on the particular virtual machine, we started having one or more apps. So this is the next step that we got into. But again, the complexity, even though a little bit managed, but still we have some deficiency in the way applications are bundled and deployed. So this layer is still heavy, bulky, and that goes with every virtual machine that is deployed on hypervisor. So that means we are not efficiently utilizing the overall hardware, because we're creating this particular disk area again and again with every virtual machine. But this is the evolution from the traditional deployment to the virtualized deployment. And with the invent of Docker, now we are able to have this layer taken out from the main base OS using very lightweight OS layer, not this big layer, but the lightweight OS layer through container runtime. And then now we are in a position to bundle our application directly with the app dependent binaries or libraries and the app artifacts as part of the container itself. Since these are very, very lightweight, like the minimum image that I can think of is close like 5 MB. That's the Alpine utility image. a container. So that's how we evolved from virtualized deployment to the container deployment. This is all towards the better efficient utilization of the infrastructure and better management of applications and having less and less interference and isolated deployment.
Yeah. So Rajesh, another question is, since we already have a virtualized environments for different OS set, actually, why containers came into the play? Is there any specific reason that people are not compromised with virtualized implementations, or is there any extra advantage through containers?
We are going through this evolution in terms of the optimal utilization of hardware, like better and efficient utilization of hardware. From the traditional to virtualized, we got some efficiency. Using container, we got even more efficiency because as this particular fat layer that comes with each virtual machine, that is negated using the container. So that is just one benefit of the container. But there are many more benefits that we have seen in the first chapter, like scalability, management, isolation of object, using the OS layers in a minimal fashion, but still isolation is also there.
Got it.
So Rajesh, to add on, I think, so as we are coming to this microservices world, so container will be, so the code is broken into pieces and so each part is loaded in the container. So that is one of the use cases.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
correct. For microservices, this is the next best cousin for microservices. Yeah. This is similar to what Java says: build once, run anywhere, anytime. So this particular fundamental, the benefits is almost similar to what Java is saying, and Java has got like different runtime for every OS defined. Similarly, Docker also has got different runtime for Windows and Linux. But since largely it is Linux and it is very much standardized, so app that we build as a Docker app can be run on any OSs as long as there is a Docker infrastructure is there. The changes required for the app to run on the Linux Docker versus Windows Docker are minimal or negligible.
So one more question, like does this container remain active till just the app is running, or till the time we manually go and stop it?
Container or any kind of like runtime app, as long as that app is serving certain user requests or some work, it has meaning for its existence. The moment the main app process is done with the work or exited, container will also exist. Running of the container and managing the life cycle of the container is the Docker runtime. And managing the container from the scalability, from the wiring of those, and putting the scheduling rules, those kind of concerns are taken care by Kubernetes. Some of the benefits why Kubernetes, as we touched based on, there is a service discovery that is needed for our application, including the load balancing. So these are the some of the prime benefits that we can get from the Kubernetes framework. It's an easy service discovery and also the load balancing. Any kind of storage orchestration, meaning attaching the storage to the application dynamically on the node, on the node, or on some central disk, or even as part of the application pod itself. So all that can be done through the storage orchestration feature. Automated rollouts and rollback can be done using Kubernetes, and it's very easy. As we'll go through some of the examples on using command line itself. We can roll out, roll back, and also scale up, down, and also roll back to a particular version or the last version. So that can be done very easily. We also get the feature of automated bean packing. For example, if we specify a resource constraint on our application, Then Kubernetes framework will figure out the right infrastructure or the right node where to place the pod on. So that is called as automatic bean packing. Self-healing, for example, if you want to have say 10 instances of our application to be running for a particular load, and for some reason if there's a destruction of the application instances, then Kubernetes controllers will automatically figure that out, what is the actual and what is the desired, and automatically the desired capacity is provided by spinning the new application instances. That's called self-healing.
Rajesh, so in the self-healing, so if you didn't give autoscale, if you didn't specify autoscale explicitly, so Kubernetes will do self-healing?
For example, if the pod is killed or exited for some reason, and if we expect the pod to be running on, then as part of the pod spec, we provide restart policies, like what should happen if the pod exits or fails, whether to restart the pod whenever it exits, or restart the pod only when it exits because of the failure, or never restart. So those kind of policies can be specified, and through these policies we get this self-healing, like automatically appropriate pod gets restarted.
Okay.
Every application has got the configuration and secrets as part of the application runtime itself, and those configuration and secrets also can be managed using this secrets and configuration management feature. For example, certain configuration which is to be there or to be given during the UAT or the prod runtime, that should not be part of the overall dev runtime. Then those configuration can be kept outside the application, and during the UAT or the prod deployment, that kind of configuration can be provided. And also any username, password related security information that also can be coded using the secret and can be placed. Okay, so this is the high-level architecture of Kubernetes and different components and their interaction. On the master node, we can see the four main components. etcd as the database where all the cluster information is kept as a key value pair. This is the distributed database, and the only way to interact with the etcd database is via the API server. So an API server is the main, very critical component of Kubernetes. Controller manager has got many controllers to check the current and desired state of the cluster and makes the appropriate changes based on the feedback received. Scheduler is the one who schedules the pod onto the nodes based on different scheduling constraints or the scheduling inputs that is provided. On the node side, we have different layer, and in these layers, this is the part from the Kubernetes. This is the Kubernetes component kubelet. As you can see that this particular arrow is with respect to the CNI, like container network interface. That kubelet will have to interact with the other parts of the cluster through the networking using CNI. And the kubelet will also interact with the container runtime like Docker. So container runtime interface has the specification to interact with the container runtime. And container runtime will interact with the OS for its work. So I was talking about different parts of Kubernetes, how these components interact with each other. Kubelet is the component which is deployed on the node side. That takes the instruction from the API server and also deploys and manages those components on the whatever the runtime that is available. The way these kubelets interact with the API server is via the protobuf protocol, and any interaction with the with the kubectl from the user perspective to the API server is it's based on the JSON REST API. So this is the second perspective on the architecture. So here you can see different components interacting. A slightly different perspective just to get some clarity on the interaction.
Kubelet and kubectl, are they both same?
No, kubectl is a command line utility to interact with cluster. Kubelet is a process that runs on every node, and it deploys the pod on those particular node and check the node state and node related cluster information from the node and sends that information back to API server for cluster management. And
Okay.
also any kind of request routing that happens by the kube proxy. A few quick points on the etcd. I will not get into details of the etcd, but just to have some information on what etcd is. It's a key value store meant for use as a distributed database. It uses raft algorithm. API server is the key element in the cluster. It's a central management entity. As I said earlier, it is the only component that has access to etcd and is designed for horizontal scaling. Constraints on the hardware, software, or any kind of like policy requirement can be the decision parameter. Affinity or the anti-affinity, for example, we may have certain requirements wherein we want certain group of pods to be running together. Then we can specify the affinity constraints, affinity input. At the same time, if you don't want to have a certain group of pods to be running together, then we can have the anti-affinity rule set up. We can also specify the data locality related parameter as an input to scheduling. Similarly, other parameters as well. We'll have more information on the specifically on the memory, CPU, and affinity and anti-affinity. These are the mostly used decision parameter for scheduling. And as part of our examples, we will touch base on this. Kube controller, even though it has got like many processes together, but it is it runs as like separate process. Like every controller is a separate process. But for the sake of having the distribution and deployment easier, convenient, all these controller components are clubbed together as a kube controller component, and it's run. So node controller is responsible for noticing and responding to node events. Replication controller is responsible to check the desired application instances against the actual number of application instances, and whenever there is a gap, it does the correction. Every pod has got certain endpoints. For example, pod will have some IP allocated, and every service has got some pods associated with the service. And this endpoint controller will watch out for the pods associated with certain service, and it ensures that all those pod IPs are actually associated with the service for any kind of request surveying. Similarly, for creation of user token, all those can be done using this controller, account and token controller. There's a role-based access control that is provided by Kubernetes, and to have those access based on role-based, this controller API is used. On the cloud controller, though we'll not get into details of any of these controllers, but at the high level, these are like some of the areas of cloud controller. In our case, since we are using AWS as our main cloud provider, and as part of the Kubernetes framework, the moment we create the ingress object, all these things will be taken care as part of that ingress creation, like creating a route and attaching the service to that particular path, and also any kind of volume which is required for the pod. So that will be also associated with the pod through the volume controller. What we need to do is that only on the cloud provider, whatever is the DNS that is there, we need to create one DNS entry per application if that application needs to be exposed to the external world via certain URL. For example, you have seen my.brainupgrade.in. The underlying service is the web-based kubectl utility, and that is exposed to the external world using the URL my.brainupgrade.in. And in terms of the routing service, that's all done through the Kubernetes framework, and the associated DNS is created on the AWS side. So when we visit the ingress part on the day 3rd, there I will show you how we map the DNS name with the particular service. Through service control also, we can directly create the load balancer, but that's pretty expensive, because if we run say 100 app, and 100 app requires 100 service instances, and if every service instance creates its own cloud load balancer as part of the service controller, then we'll have a problem in terms of the huge charges from the cloud provider, because cloud provider they charge separately for each load balancer that is created. To avoid those excessive charging, what is done normally is to have only one load balancer, and every URL that is used within the application for external interfacing, all those are routed through that load balancer. For example, if we have say my.brainupgrade, user.brainupgrade, cloud.brainupgrade, so all these 3-4 URLs request to these URLs are routed to the same load balancer to the appropriate service component within the cluster, so that we pay to AWS only for one load balancer. Kubeproxy is one of the node components. This is the network proxy that runs on every node in the cluster. It maintains its own network rules on the node, and it uses OS packet filtering layer or even forward traffic itself. Generally, it manages IP table on the OSs to route the packets appropriately. So, for example, if two services need to interact, then the request from one service to another service is routed via the kubeproxy component based on the service name. There are many more container runtimes are available. Docker is the default runtime engine that is used by Kubernetes as of now. CRI is being developed and getting into the mature stage, container runtime interface, and even the interaction with the Docker from Kubernetes is going to happen through the CRI, so that the other container runtimes also can be part of the Kubernetes. Some more add-on components. In any kind of DNS related queries within the cluster that happen via the cluster DNS, to view the cluster state and also manage cluster to some extent via the dashboard, Kubernetes provides one add-on called Kubernetes Dashboard Web UI. Since we'll be doing most of our stuff using kubectl, and for monitoring, I have set up the Grafana dashboard to monitor the state of the cluster. So we'll see the Grafana as the web UI rather than the default Kubernetes dashboard. Other components, other add-ons are available, but we'll not be using any of these add-ons except the cluster DNS, which is by default is there as part of the Kubernetes installation. Okay, so these are important objects in the Kubernetes space, and how these are related. If you understand their relationship, then it will be very easy to work and build your package your application using Kubernetes objects. Pod is the single unit of work from the Kubernetes standpoint, and it has got our application package as the Docker image. Pod can be part of replica set. For example, if we desire to have a range of pods or range of application instances, say 1 to 10, then we define deployment as a spec. And as part of the deployment spec, we define the pod as one of the subsections of the deployment. And the moment we define the pod as part of the deployment, deployment will create the replica set to manage the pods, like number of pods, like desired against the actual. Are you clear on these three? These three are important.
Can you repeat that, Rajesh?
Yeah. So pod is the smallest unit of work from Kubernetes standpoint. In real world, normally we will have instances of application and not the single instance for scalability availability. So we specify the other information in terms of the pod as part of the deployment, saying that I want this particular application component or the pod to have minimum 1 instance, maximum say 10 instance. So that kind of information is specified through the deployment object, deployment spec. And the moment we define that kind of information, for example, say replica wise, deployment creates a replica set to achieve the desired spec or desired number of replicas based on the current number of replicas. For example, if you say minimum is say 10 and the current is say only 1 pod instance, then this replica set will ensure that number of pods will be 10, matching to the desired. Right now, you just understand the meaning and how these are related to each other. As part of the examples, I will anyway show you the moment we launch the deployment and change the replicas, how replica set come into picture. That anyway I will show you as part of the examples. But concept-wise, you got to be clear. Okay, so here I have set kubeconfig as my own ID. So it is set to my ID. So using this particular kubeconfig file, I have access to my own namespace. Okay, we'll first run the Nginx container. So straight we can run this using this. Let me also open another just one sec. Okay, you can have some watch utility. Watch what is happening here. You can see that information. Okay, right now one pod is running. That's the reason earlier pod did not work. So this is one of the commands to delete the pod. So what are the status that you are seeing here? Now we'll go through all the different status provided for pod and containers in a separate slide. As of now, here we'll run few commands and explore the cluster through kubectl. So now the pod is running, so we can see some information about the pod. Describe is the command to see information on the pod. So here you can see this is the namespace that the pod is running in. This is the IP that this pod is allocated to. This is the IP and this is the EC2 reference node. This is the pod IP and this is the node IP. And right now the state of the pod is running. There are different conditions there that I'll explain once we check the pod related chapter, like what these states are. If we attach any volume, that volume will be shown here. And what are the events that happen? For example, initially the pod is assigned to a particular node. So all those important events are captured as part of the pod, and those are seen here. So first is assigned to the node. That means scheduling it happen. Then pulling up the image. Then once image is successfully done, this is the command. Then created the container, and then started the container. So all these logs you can see here. So this is one way to check the pod information. Another way is to see the pod information is this. So this is at the high level, it will show the summary, get pod. If we want to see the YAML information, we can just use this output YAML. So here you can see the status and some more details as well. We'll start from here. What this complete the pod definition spec here, we can say label that is applied on the pod. These are the managed fields from this object, pod object. You can see the different conditions when the information will be presented here. We'll have a separate slide on the ports. So when the pod became ready, when the containers were ready, when pod was initialized, when pod was scheduled, that time. So all these conditions are captured with respect to their timestamp. So these are the kind of events happen in pod's lifetime. Current status of the container, where you can see for this particular image. We did not give any version, so latest version is mapped to this 1.19. Pod is in ready state now. So far, there are no restarts for this pod, 0 restart, and started at this particular time. This is the host IP. This is the pod IP. So good amount of information can be retrieved using these two commands. Let's go to the next command. Similarly, we can see the services if there are any. So far, there are no services in my namespace. If you want to see the deployments, no deployments are there. There are certain shortcuts are also there. If we see KAPI resources, you will also see some shortcuts. So these are all API having the shorthands as well. So here you can see for the config map API object, the CM is the shorthand. For the namespaces NS, events EV. For pod, we can also have PO. For deployment, we have deploy as a shorthand. For stateful set, we have STS. When we do the auto scaling, horizontally scaling up pods, we'll use this HPA. We'll have a separate example on this auto scaling. Cron jobs, like these are features that you can quickly take a look at this API resources, and you will have a quick review of what are the features which are available as part of the API resources.
K is the shortcut for kubectl. I think.
Yeah, K is set as a shortcut, and that you can find in the bash aliases that normally users they put the shortcut.
Oh, so for us, K will not work until we set this.
No, it's already set as part of your web kubectl.
Okay.
So this is the kind of command that are set in the bash aliases for every user. So not only the K, but also I think auto completion should also work in your case. If it doesn't work, that means this particular instruction is not set as part of the environment that we have. Then we'll check the next command, cluster info. As part of the namespace, normally users they don't get to see anything outside their namespace. But what I have done is that in addition to your namespace access, but also some cluster-wide information as a read-only, I have given access to your user ID so that you can see the nodes, you can see the cluster information. So this command you can execute at your side. You can also see the nodes. You can see here some more information. These two are not only the worker nodes. One of the worker node is from the spot worker category. There are like different categories of EC2 instances that we get. Very high price, or some which are slightly lower cost, but with some caveat on their runtime or the availability. If we set certain price for that, so there are different categories of that. So this cluster is a mix of all those nodes. And I'm using KOPS as a cluster management tool to manage this cluster. If you're not aware of the KOPS, if I type KOPS, you will get to know about information of the KOPS. So this is one of the open source utility to manage Kubernetes cluster, and this is one of the best utility to manage the cluster. Even though there are paid versions of Kubernetes cluster management tools are also available. For example, AWS has got something called EKS, which is a management dashboard for Kubernetes on the AWS side, and charge is anywhere between I think $150 plus per month. That kind of stuff is also there. If one is very good in Kubernetes and also setting up cluster, then one does not need EKS as such, but everything is provided through this KOPS utility, and a lot of Kubernetes objects are there, features are there. Using those, we can have very highly scalable cluster, which is auto scale and auto scale down. So one thing is having our applications auto scale up or down. So that is one aspect. Second aspect is even the cluster should be auto-scale up or down. I hope you understood both these aspects.
Can we define our own auto scaling rules or
Yes,
both?
everything. In fact, the cluster that right now you are on has got all those rules in place. And then as we do more exercises, you will realize that the moment we start launching applications of different capacity, automatically the cluster size will increase without me doing anything manually.
You are showing us that one, that configuration.
Yeah, I'll show you that configuration as well. Just as the information, though we are more inclined towards the application specific uses from the Kubernetes side. KOps is the additional information that you can have. We'll not dwell much into KOps though.
As part of nodes, we will have multiple pods, and as part of cluster, we will have multiple nodes.
Perfect. Yeah, you got it right. Yes.
Okay.
So we'll run few more commands. So here, as part of this command, I'm sorting the results with the metadata name. Metadata name is nothing but the name that is defined for the pod under the metadata group. Now you have seen the pod spec, right? The moment I do this one, the YAML that you see here is nothing but the pod spec. So this has got pod spec plus some current status of the pod. So this is one way to see the spec. Another way to see the spec is we can say run krun and we can say nginx. But this time we will not run the pod, but we will run say dry run, and we'll see the outcome as YAML. See, now you got the pod spec. Many times writing the pod spec, at least the basic stuff of the pod spec is little time consuming and not so required. So we can run these kind of commands to directly get the YAML output spec. You got the point, right?
Rajesh, so dry run will not create the plot, right? It will create just YAML.
Correct. Dry run will not execute the spec. It will only show us the spec at the client side. And if we specify the output as YAML, we'll get the YAML output. So now I can copy this YAML and create the pod.yaml file. Let's say nginx.pod.yaml. Now I think after seeing the pod spec, now I think many of your earlier queries are slowly getting answered automatically. Like how we define containers, how we define the image, how we actually define the pod. See, the kind is the Kubernetes. So kind is the type of object, Kubernetes object. And here we can specify the kind as pod, the type of object as pod. And this pod contains the spec, container spec. And here you can see containers. So that means we can define more than one container. And then we can have, say, image, nginx, blah, blah, stuff. If we want to see the schema of this YAML file, then we can use something called kexplain pod. We can see the high-level explanation of this pod spec, YAML spec, pod spec. So here we can see first is the API version, then kind, metadata, spec, and status. But this is the first level of objects, first level of fields. If we want to see a complete depth, then we have to use the recursive option. Okay, I'll say recursive less. Okay, so now you can see all the nth level detail You can also see how those fields will be represented, whether it's a string or a map of string, whether it's a list of objects. So these are all like, if you know how YAML works, then you will be able to understand the meaning of these data types. These are the YAML data types. As you can see under the metadata, you have so many fields. Generally, we go for this name and sometimes namespace and labels. Under the spec, okay, these will cover in some other chapter. Under the spec here, we can have image or containers related section. Under the containers, we can have image related section. We can also specify the image pull policy, with this always or if not present. So those kind of policies that we can specify. So all these are lifecycle related stuff, hooks that we'll explore in our next chapter. But now these commands will give you a lot of power on traversing through the Kubernetes landscape, understand different areas, go into detail yourself without any external help. It's easy to browse through a lot of things through kubectl commands. So this is one useful command. There's a huge list of fields. Once the IP is assigned, you will see this IP getting populated. We will also see what are the init containers that pod can have. Like pod can have more than one container, and it can also have some additional containers as well as the initialization containers. That will touch base in the next chapter. Pod. Right now, we'll run a few more commands.
Rajesh, I mean, sorry, my desktop had restarted in between. So this YAML, I mean, it's generated at the end of every application run, or it gets updated during the application is running?
There are two ways to deploy the Kubernetes object, Kubernetes application. One is to use the command line option, just like this kubectl run nginx, like this. This is one way with important fields here. So this is one way to deploy the application. The moment we deploy the application using these commands, internally pod spec is created based on these imperative commands. And this is one way to deploy. Other way to deploy is we can directly use the pod YAML files like this one, and then we can directly use the apply commands. Okay, I'll go to that particular location. First, I'll see if there are any pods are there. Okay, right now I'm deleting the current pods in my namespace, and then we will apply the changes to the template file, pod definition file. So this is the pod definition file, and we can use this pod definition file to deploy our application. So now I'm gonna use this k apply -f. So I'll go to the file. Name of the file is nginx pod. Okay, so this is another way to deploy the application. Hope you understood.
Yep. The first command in this kubectl run nginx and image that you gave. So run and nginx. So that is the name that you are giving. I mean, image name is nginx. What is this after run?
Yeah. So this is the name of the pod.
Pod. Okay.
So if you use the kubectl run, you will see the information manual.
Okay.
Create and run a particular image in a pod, and there are also pretty good examples of that. So all these utilities, specifically the Linux utilities or the Kubernetes utilities, they have excellent documentation even for CLI. In most cases, you would not be needed to browse the HTML pages for these commands. Most of the things are available as part of the help commands as well.
Okay.
Okay, now we have deployed the app through the template file. So now we will try to see other resources in the cluster. So this way we can query the objects, RS replica set, deployment, service, and PO spot. One way to query Kubernetes objects. So currently in this case, you can see that there are no replica sets, no deployments, no service, only pod is there, and you can see pod index. But if I go to other namespace, say the admin namespace, let me see in the admin or the main namespace or the default namespace, what else is there. You can see there are so many replica sets are there. As part of the exercises, I deployed some frontier, middle tier stuff as well. Also, the backend tier is also deployed as part of the MariaDB as the database. And I had deployed all these pods as the deployment components. So I have three deployment, one deployment representing one application tier. So you can see frontier as one application deployment, backend as one application deployment, and middle tier as one application deployment. So these are the deployment options. So here, as part of the service, I have exposed this frontier component through the service frontier. Similarly, the backend is exposed through MariaDB web service. This middle tier is exposed through this particular service point, and this is exposed by the Kubernetes main component itself. Kubernetes as a service component. So this is the default namespace. So there is a way to also see all these objects as part of the all namespaces. So minus hyphen capital A means all namespaces. So you can see all namespaces. So you can see different user namespaces, monitoring as one namespace, kube system as another namespace, default is a default namespace. Certificate manager is another namespace. So whatever the certificate that you see on the this particular URL, you can see this is connection is secured and the certificate is properly signed. You can see it, right? This is signed by the Let's Encrypt authority, and this is the expiration period. To have such kind of signing for whatever the URLs that we are exposing, we are using this certification manager. And this is also an open source component that we can use it. So that we don't have to pay anything for SSL certificate. Assume that we have hundreds of sites. Then we need hundreds of SSL certificate like HTTPS. But through this mechanism, even a single dollar, single rupee to get SSL certificate, and everything is automatically managed. The moment expiry date comes in, automatically certificate is renewed by Kubernetes cluster itself. So while you have access to your namespace for deploying any new object or modifying any object, but I have given you access, read-only access to the complete Kubernetes cluster. Like most of the objects are visible to you. So if you type this one, this should work in your case as well. So we'll go through some more commands and then you start trying these commands. Okay, now I can see that user Bhargav created this pod, and he's facing some image pullback issue. So what he can do is that I can just do the cave describe this one, and what was the namespace? Bhargav, right? So I'll just put his namespace. Wiping out the completion is there. Good. So I can see the pod state. I can see why this particular image, particular pod is in a pending state. You can see it here. Error response and full access denied. Docker login denied. Request access the resources denied. Okay, so that means in okay, we'll have to figure out like why this error is. We have to see the pod spec as well. But this is the way that you can explore and get more information about your application. If you want to delete all pods, you have this option as well. They will not execute this.
Rajesh, is the pod name unique?
Sorry, go ahead.
Is the pod name unique, or like we can create the duplicate pod names?
In your namespace, it should be unique, but we can have many pods with the same name across the cluster as long as they are part of the different names. So it's just like a Java class. As long as the package name and the class name, that combination is unique, fine. So you can have many per class with same class as part of the different packages. That's okay. That will work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have some more ways to get specific information from cluster. So I'll show you one such way. So we have this JQ, or the some utility which is found on the Linux side, jQuery, not jQuery, some JSON related query utility is there. So using that, we can get only the information that we are interested in. So here you can see that I'm interested in getting the metadata name and the capacity of this of the nodes. So I can run this. Here you can see this is the name of the node, and under the status capacity, this is the information that is provided by the node. So I can get the same information, like I can see get nodes, and then I can see k describe nodes and name of the nodes. So for example, this 27. So here we can see node related information like CPU, how much is requested, what is the limit, and capacity. So this section, I'm querying only this section, the CPU capacity data section. These are the node labels. You can also see node show labels, and you can see that. So here you can see information with respect to topology. So this node is part of the US East one, and inside this particular region, there are 3 zones are there, A, B, C. So this node is part of the A. And the instance group that this node is part of is this. So under this instance group, I can have many more master instances. So this is part of the overall cluster management. And the type of this instance is T3 small. And I can have mix of the instance type as well as part of this instance group. So that will be called mixed instance group. So here I can have very, very high capacity, very low. Generally, it is recommended to have the similar instance type for a part of the instance group. Let's try a few more commands.
In this the nodes thing, there was something called a spot worker. What does that mean?
Okay, let me describe the node.
No,
Where?
not this. Where you had the list of nodes. I think just
This one, right? No, node description, right?
no, not description. That will give you the list of nodes.
So this is key get nodes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is something called a spot worker.
Yep. So there are different EC2 types are there. Inside that, there are on-demand and the spot worker nodes are also available. So this node is not only a worker node, but also a spot worker node. So there are different charges are there for on-demand worker nodes and spot worker nodes.
Similar to spot instances in AWS. Like, I mean, it gets.
In fact, you already know spot instances. This is the spot instance.
Okay.
And in the Kubernetes annotation, it is annotated as spot worker. You can also see when it was launched. If you want to have more information, we can say O wide. So we'll get more information, including the what is the OS image for that stuff. I think in the morning I was talking about like different OSs for various nodes, right? So this is one example. So here you can see the master node has got the Ubuntu 20. One worker node has got the same OS, but this spot worker has got Debian as the OS. And on top of like the container runtime is obviously the Docker. You can also see the Docker version as well, container runtime.
So this OS image will be the first line in our Docker file, I think.
That's right.
Okay.
So okay, so in the Docker file, it's a different whatever the image that you specify as part of the from, and that that layer, that image layer, will be running on this base OS. So this is the host OS. So on
Okay.
host OS, Docker container runtime will run, and inside Docker container runtime, whatever the base image that you have specified as part of the Docker file, that will be the first layer.
Okay.
I believe that showing you the real cluster with the real scalability will enhance your understanding of the subject matter, rather than having the some isolated single node setup where the information is limited. So we'll not be able to grab the real world uses of Kubernetes cluster.
So how did you create this cluster? Is it EKS or Kubernetes cluster?
KOPS, KOPS. I use the KOPS to build this cluster.
Okay.
Yeah, creation is a little complex. Creation and managing the scalability is slightly complex matter. Okay, we'll run a few more commands.
But any cost difference if you apply that model versus EKS versus setting your own Kubernetes cluster on the EC2 instance?
As I said, EKS is charged minimum $150 per month. KOPS is free. EKS takes less time to set it up. COPS also takes less time to set it up, but you will have to first understand what COPS is.
Exactly.
But once you understand COPS, then spinning multiple cluster is just the matter of minutes or hours. So this is one. Second, whenever AWS or those kind of infrastructure provider, they provide some kind of platform. One is the convenience of users. So that is one thing. But second is that underlying resource creation and management of those resources, because every resource is charged. So the overall rules are geared to have slightly more resources than you actually required many times, and you pay much more if you let Amazon to manage your cluster through EKS.
Yeah, but
It's only the
OpenShift,
management layer that is different. There are open source, there are paid management layers are also there. Based on the org policy, those kind of decisions will be made. But in most cases, big organization, no matter the paid version there, but still organizations will have their own layers on all these top throws. Okay, I will execute a couple of more commands, and then I will let you start the exploration from your side. Okay, here I'm running one BGBox container pod. Yeah, image is BGBox. So this is also one of the slim version of Linux utility stuff. So what it does is that it launches the pod, and since I have specified interactive way, right after launching the pod, it also logs into the container itself. So as you can see right now, I am inside the container. So I can say things, and now you are able to see that here as well. So we can have these kind of utilities here. A lot of utilities, Linux utilities are bundled as part of the BGBox, and BGBox is one such pod, one such Docker image that we will use for any troubleshooting by logging into BGBox and again accessing the other services network to see if ports are open or not open. So this is just to check whether the particular port is open or not. So here I'm trying to just check the google.com 80 port is open or not. But in our application context, we might have launched certain service, but that service is not available to other services or other deployments. So we are unsure whether that particular service is running on a port or not. So this is the way to verify within the namespace or the outside the namespace or within the complete namespace. So these are like some of the utilities provided by the BGBox. That's where it's very, very handy. Alpine and the BGBox. So these are the two Docker images that we should mostly use for troubleshooting.